Welcome back to a brand new episode of Your Wealth and Beyond. I'm your host, Andrew Raffel. And today, listeners and viewers, we're going to learn all things about how to create superfans. And I'm super excited to learn from somebody who spent their entire career figuring out how to build superfans, and she is passionate about it. So today we have on Brittany Hodak. Brittany, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, thanks, Andrew. I'm great. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
You are very welcome. So not only are you an award-winning entrepreneur, author of Creating Superfans, which we're going to dig in today, plus been on Shark Tank and done a whole plethora of things to help us as business owners learn what our clients and customers, what they're striving for in them feeling confident about referring and recommending. So want to learn a little bit more about how you got into this space. Why is it a passion? And then we'll touch on like what a superfan is and the model and how you built it.
Well, I always wanted to work in the music industry. That was sort of the path that I thought I would be on from day one. When I was 16, I got a job at a radio station. I interned at several record labels and music magazines, got a job for a record label after college, and was always fascinated by why some bands became super popular and others went away, because it wasn't always about who had the best music. It wasn't always about who had the best marketing budget. It wasn't always about like the best visuals or even the best PR teams. And what I started to see again and again and again, both on sort of a local level and also a national or even international level, is the bands who every time they came back to town sold more tickets and played bigger venues and had more people buying the merch were the ones who people came back again and brought their friends. It was about that virality of how do you create a fan base that is so loyal and so engaged that they're gonna come to the next show and they're gonna bring more people to the next show. How do you do that? How do you create that sort of groundswell of grassroots support? So that's what I was like really fascinated with from a young age in the music industry. But then once I started working with, I launched my first business when I was 26 in the music space, but my first big corporate partner was Walmart. And so very soon I started working with all of these CPG brands. So we were doing stuff with Pepsi and Unilever and Johnson & Johnson and, you know, every brand you can imagine. And they were trying to solve the exact same problems. How do we get people to buy more of our products again and tell their friends to buy our products too? And so I started to think about that overlap and what it was from a psychographic standpoint that really truly made people continue to choose your thing at the exclusion of everybody else's thing.
And so, like, going back to the first experience with that, with the music industry, like with Taylor Swift and Dolly Parton, Katy Perry, like, what did you see that they did differently to connect with their audience?
So the number one thing, and this is something that everybody listening can do too, you've got to connect your story to theirs. You have to make your thing relevant to their life. How, like, Taylor Swift is better at this than anybody on the planet right now, probably, right? And regardless of the industry you're in, you can take lessons from what Taylor does. Taylor makes her fans feel like they are part of this story. They're not on the outside looking in. They're not the people who are just there to like buy the tickets and buy the albums and consume. She invites them into everything. She gives them credit for everything. She creates these experiences to make them want to spend their time looking for Easter eggs and finding the hints and the clues and speculate. And she's done that masterfully at every single step of her career. She's made them feel like they matter versus a lot of artists who are like, the art's the art, take it or leave it. And they don't want to meet the fans and they don't want to do the interviews and they don't want to talk about this sort of two-way street of you're asking for things and I'm delivering it. It's just like, I made this thing and you can enjoy it or not. I don't really care. And so many brands take that approach of like, here's the thing and you should probably buy it, but if you don't, oh well. And it's no wonder that people would rather engage with brands that don't treat them that way or professionals who don't treat them that way.
And that's something that, I mean, it's hard to teach. I mean, it's got to be innate. You know, you can't fake that type of caring, can you?
I don't think you can fake it. So here's kind of where I stand on that. I do believe there are people born with much more natural ability, like God-given ability, than others. It's like anything else, right? Like not everybody is born with what they need to be an NBA player. But there are certainly people who are willing to work hard and develop more skills that make them more likely to get to the NBA than somebody who was born with all the right ingredients but never did anything with it. And so I think anybody who is in a business where you're dependent upon people choosing you over somebody else, anything that could be seen as somewhat of a commodity, you have to care. You have to go all in on doing more of this to try to stand out, because in a sea of people in red and white stripes, you've got to help somebody understand why you are Waldo. Like, why are you the only person that they should come to get help with whatever it is that they're looking for help with, whether it's, investing or something else, depending on everybody listening to this show right now. But you've got to do that, because if not, you're going to lose so many of the toss-ups.
Yeah, and I think of even some of these bigger brands, like obviously Walmart, who you spent some time with, but another big catalog like Trader Joe's. They've built their brand based on that sharing back and forth, and people have that affinity that, like, I'll drive 20 miles to go to that Trader Joe's because of how they make me feel when I'm in there.
Yeah, and the really cool thing about Trader Joe's is how much people who work at Trader Joe's love working at Trader Joe's. It is very competitive to get hired there. They retain their employees at a much higher rate compared to just about every other supermarket chain in the industry, because people like working there. They've created an environment where they've said, our customers would probably be happier if our employees were happier. So we're going to do what it takes to have happier employers or happier employees, because happier employees lead to better experiences, which lead to happier customers.
And, for this show, a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs, mature companies are trying to get their companies off the ground. And even for the firm that I've built over the last 15 years, Baintree, it's, part of what we always look at is, okay, we always want to bring in new clients. And sometimes we're chasing, and like we're always, whether it's digital marketing or we're trying to get the silver bullet of how are we going to get into more people. But like we forget that we have these enduring clients that really appreciate what we do. And so many times businesses, big or small, we don't look within and figure out how can we take these, for us, 400 families that trust us. Why don't we work inward and say, let's build that experience and let's make it where we can emulate them? We're always chasing. Have you seen that in the experience of the businesses that you've worked with, that we're chasing over here when we should be looking over here? And how did we develop the plan to take what we already have, these individuals that trust us, and how do we make it where we can build that trust and confidence so they bring more people to us?
Absolutely. I think a trend that, honestly, I don't know how far back it goes. Like, certainly it goes back to the beginning of people really using like software as a service to track things and look at metrics. It probably goes back at least a few decades and maybe longer. But I believe that many of us have been taught to value acquisition more than retention. And I think it's because we put people in sales roles where we say, here are all the KPIs. This is what you're looking at. This is what you're tracking. Acquire, 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 acquire. And that is sexy and that is celebrated. And we're paying people in commission and we're making a big deal about it. And then oftentimes not treating those customers as well once they actually sign on the dotted line, because there's a little bit of this mentality of like, oh, they're already a customer. Like, we don't have to try anymore, right? It's like, this is like the worst analogy ever, but like, people who are like, well, I don't have to shave my legs to go on dates anymore because I'm married or whatever, right? It's like, oh, well, like, we're already in this thing. So I absolutely think putting a spotlight on your retention and then also the referrals that are generated from those customers is the most important thing that any business owner can do. Because yes, new customers are great. It's 100 times better? Old customers.
Yes. And so this framework that you've spent your years building, first, let's just define high level to the audience. Like, what's a super fan? What does that mean in the realm of business?
So I define a superfan as a customer or stakeholder who is so delighted by their experience that they become an enthusiastic advocate. And there's three components of that. Number one, customer or stakeholder. So for my purposes, when I talk about a super fan, these are people who have actually done business with you or who have walked alongside somebody who is actively doing business with you. And the reason for that is because we all know we're more likely to act on a referral or a recommendation from somebody who has actually been in a business transaction with someone than somebody who's like, oh, my cousin does this, or I think the guy that, I know down the street happens to be what you're looking for, right? So that's when we're ultimately talking about super fans as a tool to get more referrals. It's important that this is a customer or a stakeholder. Second part of the definition, they're delighted by their experience. These are people who really enjoy working with you. We can talk about all the ways to operationalize that to make sure it happens. And then third, they become an enthusiastic advocate, meaning when they have the opportunity to advocate on your behalf, they do so. They care enough to say, check out XYZ, to insert themselves into the conversation. Sometimes that is going to be very like right down the center, right? Somebody saying, hey, do you have an advisor that you can recommend? And other times it's a little bit more proactive for them to say, hey, have you thought about? And then proactively making that, conversation starter to set that up. But they're doing it not because they've been asked, not because they're being compensated in some way, but because they want to. They're an enthusiastic advocate. So in other words, superfans are customers who are likely to create more customers.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So let's break that down then. What, when we look at some of the bigger firms, like, and you gave an example in one of your interviews with Chewy and Zappos, which have been great. Like, what can we do from that beginning? So we spent the time, we onboarded, whatever industry we're in, we went above and beyond, and we've got now somebody who came on board and bought our service or our relationship, and things are on that beginning part is always the good track, right? You have that you haven't messed up yet. So what are some of the things that you teach in your book, your formula, that we start from that beginning that we can then start harnessing and deepening that relationship so that we can get to points 2 and 3?
Yeah, well, the first is to really decide that you want superfans, right? Like, many of you listening, hopefully almost all of you listening, are like, yeah, that sounds great. I would love for people to be loyal to me so that they're spending more money, they're telling more people. There are some businesses that make the decision that this isn't what they want. They do see customers as transactional and interchangeable and like, great. So that's the first thing, like, decide that you want superfans. The next thing is decide what you're willing to do to earn them, because you can't buy superfans. You don't just like find them. You have to create them. And superfans are created at the intersection of your story and every customer story. Whether you are a musician or whether you're selling something, superfans are created where your story and theirs overlap. Because when your story and theirs overlap, what you're doing is overpowering apathy. And apathy is, I think, the biggest and also most underrated threat to every single business in the world. I talk to people all the time, especially entrepreneurs, who are like, we have an awareness problem. Not enough people know about how great we are. If only we could buy more ads, if only we could go viral, if only we could sponsor this thing or get in front of more people. But when I truly dig in and we look at the numbers, the truth is plenty of people care. Like, way more people care than you actually have the capacity to serve if everybody raised their hand and said, I'm interested. It's not an awareness problem. It's an apathy problem. You haven't given people compelling evidence to say, I want to work with you. I care about this thing. So you have to decide, how do you make your thing matter? How are you telling your story in a way that makes everybody who is well qualified to be your customer want to raise their hand and say, please take my money? So I have a 5-part framework called the super model that we can talk through if you want to talk through that. But that's like really what you've got to do. You've got to decide, like, I don't want to just have a revolving door of customers. I want to create super fans, and I'm willing to do what it takes for somebody to say, wow, you're great. Because you don't create super fans by being just a little bit better than your competitors. You have to truly be super.
And that is the S of your super, right? The acronym of super. So that story, when we start with it, like trying to, all the clutter and the, with digital and just the information overload that's out there now. How do we as businesses start building that story where it is the understanding of why we exist, and how do we get that out to the people?
Yeah. So the S in super is start with your story. And when I say start with your story, it's not lead with your story. It's everything has to originate from your story. So exactly as you just asked, Andrew, why do you exist? Why should I pick you instead of someone else? Because if you can't present compelling evidence that makes the argument that I should pick you instead of somebody else, I'm probably not going to pick you. Or maybe I'll pick you some of the time and somebody else some of the time. So when I say start with your story, it's being able to persuasively let somebody know how you are different from all of your peers, why you have something to offer that nobody else does. And then when it comes to how to tell that story, it's all about, well, so in the supermodel, the next step is it's understand your customer story. So knowing who your ideal customers are, what it is that they want, how you can make their lives better, what are they struggling with, or what's the transformation they're looking for. And when you understand those things, you can begin to connect your story with theirs. You'll start to be able to answer the questions of, well, where should I show up to reach them? What type of content should I be offering them? What sort of tools do I need to create to help them on their journey? How can I create a compelling narrative of why I am exactly the right person that they need? So the S is start with your story. The U is understand your customer story. And these all sort of build on each other. The P is personalize. And that's where you're able to truly make the compelling argument that you will treat them better than anybody else and that you are the answer for what it is that they're looking for.
But then you actually have to do it, right? And
You do
that
have to
is
do it. Yes.
that P is really where you have this cross section of, you could do all these things, but it really has to be ingrained in the community of your team and your stakeholders. So what is some advice, or what are some of the mistakes that you see where businesses aren't doing that correctly?
Well, so within personalization, I kind of put it into two buckets. There's what I call high tech and what I call high touch. So high tech are all of the things that you can automate, all of the like programmatic personalization, which now, to be honest, is sort of like table stakes. It's sort of required. We're way past the days where you could just treat everyone the same. When you're talking to somebody, whether it's in a newsletter, whether they're on your website, like you need to be serving content that is personalized and relevant to them. The technology exists to let everyone choose their own adventure in a way. On the other side are the high touch personalization strategies, which depending on your business could be anything from sending handwritten notes to having one-on-one phone calls to remembering, things like birthdays or anniversaries or sending gifts. When you can create an environment where your high tech and your high touch systems work together, that is where you can truly create the highest degree of impact. That is where you're essentially treating every customer the way they want to be treated. You're making every customer feel like they are the most important one, not like it's an assembly line where you're rinsing and repeating and doing the exact same thing 85 times in a week for 85 different customers.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of businesses are falling into that trap of using automation now with AI, and that the customers and clients aren't stupid. They know that, hey, this was just a canned email that just put my name on there to wish me a happy birthday. But is that moving the needle? Probably not.
Yeah, and
Some of the things,
I would also argue like so many people do things like that because they're like, oh, I just want to get in front of the customer. I just want to do this. And that's like going back to what I said before about apathy. Like sometimes people will say, oh, I've got to talk to them this often for them to remember me. No, you don't. If you do one impactful, memorable thing to earn that attention, to earn them remembering about you, that's going to be more impactful than 75 like mediocre sort of rinse and repeat generic touches, regardless of how those are happening, whether it's, email, text messages, direct mail, whatever. It's all about quality over quantity.
yeah, and one of the areas that, like, here's an example we've used in the past. If a client tells us that they've lost a pet, pet is just like, it's their family. And so we've done this several times where we've like gone on to their Facebook account, found pictures, and then our team has created this nice memorial or tribute type of artwork that then we send to them with the dog and a blessing. And those are the things that it may only cost $30, and it took us 45 minutes to do, but it's that little thing there.
Yeah.
Just ingratiated them to us for the long haul because they know we're listening.
Yeah, and they're going to remember it forever, and they're going to tell people, right? Maybe they'll tell one person, maybe they'll tell a million people, but you are now no longer an interchangeable commodity provider who they may make a decision to go work with somebody else because they can save a little bit of money or get something, a little bit faster, because now it's about, well, I found my person. How could I leave my person?
And then you also mentioned too, like the one-on-ones, or even like just pick up the phone and call somebody, because so many times we're not talking on the phone anymore. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in, just what we tell our team here is, even if we don't have a review meeting set up anytime soon, it's just like, give somebody a call with no ulterior motives, just checking in on them, finding out how they're doing.
I love that. Especially if you have people who are at a season of their life where there maybe aren't a lot of other people calling to check in on them and talk to them. I think it's, I saw somebody posting something online the other day. I speak to a lot of realtors and do a lot in the real estate community, and a woman got a call at like 10:30 at night from an elderly woman whom she had helped get into her house like 2 years before. And she was having a medical emergency. It was in like full cardiac arrest by the time this woman got there. And everything was okay. Like she called 911. She took care of the woman. But when she woke up, she said, I tried calling my kids and nobody answered, and I didn't know what to do. And I knew that you always answered the phone. Like every time I called you, like I remembered that you were always there. So she called her. And, I think with older customers in particular, but not exclusively, like this can also apply to young people. They may not have people that are calling them and checking on them just to say hi, just to see how they're doing. And you never know when that conversation that you have with somebody, even if it's only 15 minutes, is the only time they're talking to somebody else like all week long.
Yeah. And so in that personalization, when we think of generation, so you talk about like, the older, the boomers, but if you think of Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, are you noticing anything that companies have to do differently based upon that generational gap?
Yes. So one of the things that I talk about in the book, there's a guy named Dr. Tony Alessandra who wrote a book all the way back in like the 90s, I think, where he introduced this concept of the platinum rule. He said, we all grew up with the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated. But the platinum rule says that's not enough. You've got to treat people the way they want to be treated. And where we often see sort of areas where it's easy to like maybe make a guess of how somebody's going to want to be treated, we think about it generationally, but it's not just that, right? It could depend on where somebody is at in their career journey, where they're living. Is it more rural? Is it more urban? Do they have kids? Do they not have kids? Whatever. So it is incumbent upon the person trying to earn their business to give them as many opportunities as possible to choose their own adventure. Do they want to do everything digitally, or do they want to have a, hybrid of some stuff is going to be digital, some stuff is going to be in person? How often do they want to talk on the phone versus handling things in another channel, whether that's, email, texting, whatever. So absolutely, you should look at the way that you do business, look at your customer's journey, and look at all the places where there's an exchange of information happening, and ask yourself, are there a few different ways that I could do this? And even if it's not your preferred method, if you're able to be accommodating for that person, to meet them where they're at, right? And like some of it is so dumb. Like a week or so ago, I was on a pre-event call. So I'm a keynote speaker. So I travel all around the country. I'm constantly doing events. I'm constantly working with teams. And we had set up a pre-event call for a client, and a couple of people were like late to the meeting, and they were very apologetic. They're like, sorry, we're not a Zoom team. Like we're a Teams team. Like we usually do stuff in Microsoft Teams. So, we weren't like one person had to update Zoom because they hadn't used it in 2 months. And somebody else was like, oh, I forgot my password and all of these things. And I said to Alex on my team who sets up meetings, like, okay, well, from now on, we've learned that we need to ask, like, are you a Zoom company or are you a Teams company? Are you a Google Meet company? Because I don't care where we have the meeting, but what I want to do is make sure that I'm making it as simple as possible because I'm using the technology that whoever I'm meeting with is most comfortable using. So just little micro examples like that. And if you look at your own customer journey, there might be maybe there's 7, maybe there's 70 moments where you say, okay, here's where I can give people like a door number 1, door number 2 option to make this feel a little easier for them.
And then the remaining critical steps we've got, well, exceeding expectations. So we've touched on it a little bit, but let's go through it. Let's dig into that. So how do we continue to set that as, this becomes part of the process?
So every single pillar of the supermodel builds on the one that came before it. So start with your story, understand your customer story, personalize, and then E is exceed expectations. And that is about truly going above and beyond. So I believe that there's only 3 types of interactions that any of us ever have. At the end of anything that we experience, we're going to feel one of 3 ways: better, worse, or the same as we felt before we experienced that thing. And the overwhelming majority of the experiences that all of us have in our lives are neutral. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of times a day, we process the information, move on, get the thing, move on, check the box, move on. So if you can be intentional about looking for those moments where there's something neutral or maybe even something negative and remixing or reimagining or re-engineering that moment to be positive instead, you're creating all of these feel-good moments that can become opportunities for people to talk about, perhaps, but also just things that feel good. Like we all have people that we see their name come up on our phone and we're like, ugh, I don't want to answer because we know it's going to be like draining and it's going to suck and they're going to like ask us for something and like the energy is just negative, right? We also all have people that we know that we're like, I will pick that phone call up every time because I'm going to leave that conversation better than I entered that conversation. So I call it intentional experience design. And in my book, Creating Superfans, I sort of make the case for making intentional experience design part of what you do with your team on a regular basis, but looking for ways that you can intentionally elevate those neutral or negative moments into more positive ones.
And so examples of that can be what?
Examples of that can be anything, right? So, people get a statement in the mail from you. Well, that's like boring and doesn't have to do a lot. Are you putting something in there to make them smile? Whether that's a handwritten note, whether that's a bookmark, whether that's a magnet, whether that's a note for their kids. People are calling you and waiting on hold. What is the hold message? What is the hold music? What are the options? What are the signs like in your lobby or in your parking lot? How easy are you making it for people to find you when they go to your website or Google you? Like literally find you. Like, where is your office? What are your hours? Where should they park? Are there things that they need to know about, like the logistical things? There are countless examples of things that you can do at every single step of a customer or prospect's journey to help show them that you're a little bit more thoughtful and a little bit more intentional than some of the other people that may have previously been in their consideration set.
Yeah. And I think too, with with AI and automation, this is going to become so important to separate you from the masses as business owners, right? Because it's going to be so easy just to plug them into a system and they're going to know they're just in the system, and that, 17th email they get isn't going to move the needle at all. So these little wins, for us, it's, the experience of them when they come into the office and, from Jess up front and how she greets them and knows what they like to drink because they've been in the office for years. And, hey, would you like that tea that we, those are the type of things. And it's just like such little things that can be done, and using technology to streamline it for us so that we can sort through it. But you got to blend it together. Blending it together is going to then give that human experience.
Absolutely. And the thing to remember about AI is, especially with generative AI, it is built upon serving you what it thinks is the right thing, which means that the algorithm is giving you the most average thing. Like AI is designed to give you the most common, the most standard, the most average response, because that is what is, like, from a probability standpoint, most likely to be what it thinks that you're looking for. So AI can give you something that's average, but especially as AI continues to be democratized and having everybody have access to it at their fingertips, you have to go so far above and beyond that, because it's literally what everyone else is doing or offering or making available. So that should always, 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 always be the floor, not the ceiling, and not the like, well, ChatGPT said it, so let's run with it. It's like, that is literally like the vanilla ice cream. And now it's up to you to add the flavors and the toppings to turn it into a sundae.
Yeah. And doing some research for today, I had to dig in a little bit to AI, and I got it deep into there and found out you're a Guinness World Record holder still. Did I find, is that true? Did they, or was that?
It is true. That was not a Chat GPT hallucination. Yeah, so it's funny. I actually wrote a business plan for the company that became the company that I founded when I was 26 or 27, when I was like 19. And at my school, there was an interdisciplinary honors minor that you got if you did all of these capstone courses leading up to a big project. And so mine was based on this idea of creating this like super fan edition version of a band's album. And it was going to be, let's make the packaging match the love and intentionality that goes into recording the songs. So I'd followed this band on tour and, interviewed everybody and taken all these photos and collected all this great stuff, and was going to release this package with their major label for their debut, and that was going to be my big capstone project. Well, the band broke up right before my final semester of school, and I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do to still graduate and still get this interdisciplinary honors minor? Because if you changed your thesis project, you had to go back and do all the courses again. That was the rule. And so I was like, I need something that is so over the top and so visible that this school will sort of overlook the fact that this is a very, this is like a late fourth quarter substitution. So it was right after Hurricane Katrina. And I was like, what can I do to help people who've been displaced by this hurricane? And I always had this like calling to do stuff for Toys for Tots. It's a charity that I think is one of the greatest charities in the world. It's run by the United States Marine Corps, and their entire mission is to ensure that no child wakes up on Christmas morning without something from Santa, because they have seen and they have heard from people who've gone on to become Marines that for many children, that's the time where they lose hope, because Santa forgot about them. And they think, well, if Santa forgot me, then like nobody cares and nobody's going to remember me. So their mission is to ensure that no child has to have that feeling on Christmas morning. And so they work with people in communities, all over the United States. And I was like, what can I do for Toys for Tots to help Katrina victims? So I came up with this idea of creating the world's largest Christmas stocking, because that was a Guinness World Record that I was pretty sure I could break. I was like, I don't have any, like sports talents. Like, I'm not gonna, I don't have anything where I can be like the tallest or the longest or any of the sort of like stamina, like where, did this for the longest amount of time or kept this up the longest or whatever. But I was able to rally a bunch of my friends and classmates at the University of Central Arkansas. We sewed out of fleece a Christmas stocking that was 54 feet tall and 27 feet wide. And we filled it up with nearly 13,000 toys that people across the community had donated. And many of those were kept in the Central Arkansas community where I lived, where we did have a lot of people who had been displaced by Katrina. And then thousands more were donated to people all throughout the South and Southeast who had relocated to other places out of New Orleans. And it was really cool. The adjudicator from Guinness World Records flew down and like we measured the stocking and had a big ceremony, and it was really cool. And I got to do a lot of like fun TV stuff because the story got picked up by some of the major media outlets, and my school was kind enough to go ahead and let me count that as my thesis project and graduate with that minor honors. So yeah, it is true. I have a Guinness World Record.
Love that. Great pivot and, incredible. Never would have thought that can be built like 54. Wow, that's amazing. So that's awesome. With Shark Tank, so walk through the listeners there. So how was that experience for you?
Shark Tank was really cool. And again, it wasn't anything that I ever thought I would do. It wasn't part of the plan. I loved Shark Tank. I watched the show, but I got a call from a casting producer one day who said, "Do you want to come on Shark Tank?" And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds like fun." He had read an article about my business in Forbes and said, "I think you would be great on the show." And so I got to go on the show, and at the time, the valuation that I received for my business and the offer that I received I got offers from 4 of the sharks, and on the show did a deal with 2 of them, although I ultimately then didn't do the show, or didn't do the deal after the show, which is what happens a lot of times. You kind of get into due diligence and you're like, oh, maybe this isn't the right deal. But at the time, it was the largest valuation ever for a female founded company. And it was really cool because it opened the doors to working with a lot of huge brands. One of the things that I said on the show was, I would love for my company to support more sports franchises. We're doing all of this great stuff in the music industry. We've got some really cool clients in Hollywood, but it would be great to work with sports teams. And I started getting calls and emails from owners of sports teams that were like, "Hey, can we fly you down to like sit in the box and watch this game? And let's just figure out how to have you do things for all of our season ticket holders or all of our corporate partners or everybody who's, buying hospitality events at the stadium." And so it was a really fun experience.
Yeah, and that brings in with sports and fanatics. I mean, that is creating superfans. That is what they sometimes just fall into, but you can see the teams that have really, excelled at that, versus, and it's not even so much the product that's on the field, like for me being from Cleveland, the Browns have just been a disaster for 2 decades plus, but they still have a rabid fan base. And so, and now they're doing things. I think they can be doing things a lot better. You can definitely get out there and help the owner because they have, they can be doing better. But just like musicians, I think we can learn from some of these franchises, these sports franchises, whether here or you see over in Europe with the soccer teams or the football teams out there, what they've done to build that rabid fan base. And, and those fans are going to spend all kinds of money and they're going to come day in and day out, even if the product on the field isn't as good as it probably should be. The last, so we have then repeat. So for that, it's just talk through on that consistency.
Yeah, so the final R, or the final letter in the supermodel is the R, which stands for repeat. And there's a quote that I love that I have in the book. It's from Elizabeth Arden. The quote is almost 100 years old. She said, "Repetition makes reputation, and reputation makes customers." I think we've all been in a situation where we maybe tried a restaurant and thought, "That's amazing." And then we went back a few weeks later and ordered the same thing, and it just wasn't as good. Like, it didn't taste the same. Maybe the service wasn't quite as good. And it creates that cognitive dissonance in your mind of, well, which one of these experiences was the normal and which was the exception? And so then you're thinking, like, do I go back? Do I roll the dice? Is it going to be fantastic like it was the first time? Is it going to kind of like be so-so? Or what if it's worse? What if they're just declining? And so do you roll the dice and go back a third time? Maybe. But if there are lots of other options nearby, maybe you don't, right? And you're certainly not going to be telling people about the experience, the great experience, right? You're not gonna be like, "Hey, go try out this restaurant and let me know if it's any good or not," because I can't decide. So the R in the supermodel is about the need for repetition. So it's building the systems and processes that allow you to operationalize the things that matter, to create consistently and predictably outstanding experiences for your customers. So it doesn't matter what day of the week or what time of day or what team member they encounter, the experience is always going to look the same or very, very close to the same, and it's always going to be exceptional.
Okay, so we've got start with your story, understand who your customer is and their story, personalize, exceed expectations, and then rinse and repeat.
That's it. I should have said rinse and repeat. I like that better. I might have to change
So,
it. Supermodel
so
2.0.
listeners, you don't even need to buy the book now. We've got it all just dialed in. No, you're
You
going
totally
to
need to
buy
buy the
the
book.
book.
Please buy the
No,
book.
the book is coming. So, what's in store for you? So, like, you're as an entrepreneur yourself, you're passionate about helping businesses grow. But what about you? What's the next few years look like? What do you want?
Well, it's a great question. My favorite thing in the world is speaking, getting to be on stage, speaking with audiences, hearing people say, you inspired me to change this, or you inspired me to do that. So I speak 50 or 60 times a year. I'm on the road quite a bit. I love doing workshops when I speak. So a lot of times it's like a keynote and a workshop together. And at some point, I will start working on the next book. It's funny because, like, so my book came out in January of 2023. So it's not quite 2 years old yet. And immediately when the book came out, people were like, what's the next book? When are you writing the next book? And I was like, when 1 billion people have read this book, because this book is still new to literally billions of people on the planet who've never heard of it. But there's always this funny, like, what's next? What's next?
Yeah.
So I do write quite a lot. I do share quite a lot about the importance of creating superfans, about the idea of earning referrals. So the next book will probably be very much in alignment with this one, of the things that you're doing to earn your customers' attention and to earn their business again and again and again, because ultimately that's what you're doing, right? And even if you're in a business like wealth management, where there's like a high change cost, right? Like, it's hard, it's a big lift for somebody to leave one advisor and find another. They can still do it. You still have to earn their loyalty. You have to earn that retention. And so I think that's something that, as I said at the top of the episode, sometimes we can kind of take for granted, right? We get to thinking about acquisition at the expense of retention sometimes.
Yeah, and the companies that continue to evolve and continue to grow themselves, as what they're providing, the value that they're providing, and understanding that it doesn't matter big or small, those that continue to evolve will continue to have that fan base. And there's countless companies that been there and then just the trajectory changed because they, like you said, just felt like, hey, we got the clients, it's easy. And then ultimately they lose touch with really the relationship and the value that they're bringing. And that's, I think any business goes through those fluctuations, and you've always got to stay true to the calling. That's the key. Stay true to your calling of why you're doing it, why you get up and why your stakeholders get up and why you do what you do to help the people that have trusted you. Yeah. But you have to evolve always.
Absolutely.
Well, we appreciate you coming on today. This has been, and again, just tip of the iceberg of what's in the book. So please, everybody who's listening or watching, there'll be links to how we can buy the book, whether we do the audio book. We've got the podcast that you're on. You're doing a wonderful job in getting the message out there, and you're obviously passionate about each day what you're doing, and you're bringing that to the table. And this is, I think when everyone looks at how do I get referrals, how do I do this, how do I do that, you've created a great trademark in regards to what we're all looking for, which is the superfan. We don't need thousands and thousands of clients in some businesses. You can, with 100, if you have 100 superfans, be so successful.
Absolutely. Give me 100 superfans over 100,000 sort of apathetic, semi-engaged followers any day.
Yeah, and it's not all about, hey, I got 7,000 views on this. If we only got 50, but they're the real 50 that are going to then forward it on to other like-minded. That's what we have to look at. And so, I think from the standpoint of technology is important, message is important, but boots on the ground. Go back old school, separate yourself that way by going back old school, listening and really caring about the people that are in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did we miss anything?
No, I think we got it all. So thank you for inviting me on the show. It's been so much fun to have this conversation. If anybody wants to check out the book or the podcast or anything else, you can find all things me at BrittanyHodak.com. And I am at Brittany Hodak on just about every social platform.
Love it. Well, we love what you're doing. We'll continue to follow you and keep bringing the message to the people. And we wish you tremendous success over the next few years and look forward to the next book. But we're not putting pressure on you to get it done tomorrow. I know how hard that is to write a book. So just keep doing what you're doing and have a great Halloween with the kiddos today.
Thanks, Andrew. Talk to you soon.
Very welcome. All right. Stay tuned for a brand new episode later this month. We appreciate everybody. And if you found this valuable, please like, subscribe, and follow. We'll talk to you real soon. Happy planning, everybody.